Fairhaven Falls by M.T. O'Neill. Chapter 1. Connor studied the dimensions and depth of the crack in the window frame as the invisible man stared at him from the corner of the room. The previous winter had been mild, but Connor could no more trust the season in Maine than a blind man could trust the honesty of a thief. The eyes of the invisible man continued to burrow into Connor. With shoulders pinned against the wall, Connor turned his head away from the window and instead towards the white wall opposite, 8 feet away. A fly rested against the wall, which bore several prominent yet unidentified stains. I could go after it now, but I may as well leave it be until I simply cannot bear the stillness anymore. I'll be grateful for the distraction then. He exhaled a weary sigh at the yelping and wailing emanating from beyond the steel door of his bedroom. The screams had grown more distant. Stenson was suffering again, perhaps from one of his many nightmares, perhaps once again from the heavy hand of an orderly. His gaze lowered to the wooden floor beneath him, almost black. It was heavily worn with deep scratches on the surface. One plank had buckled and was warping, the result being a subtle creaking when pressure was applied. Except for the metal bed, hay mattress, lumpy pillow, and threadbare blanket, Connor's room was barren of furniture or personal belongings. Yet, not all were lucky enough to have a privacy of a room. The population had soared in the last year, and now once empty halls sported rows of beds to contain the recently admitted population. What is she doing now? Is she happy? Does she know that she's not yet a widow? Does she consider herself one? Is there another courting her affections? And what of my precious James, the son that I promised to care for and teach to be a man? He lacks a father to teach him of the world. What if he does have a father figure? What if a new man has taken him under his wing and taken my place in our bed? His mind recited the ritual of self-torture as he lolled his head in the direction of the window once more. A narrow road left the grounds, followed by a natural tree line, and meandered its way down the side of a large hill on which the complex was built. At the base of the hill, the road led through the main gates of the perimeter fence to his inevitable destination, the same destination at which they would all end, a small patch of overgrown land at the foot of the hill, just beyond the perimeter fence 100 yards away from the town cemetery. 500 yards from the hill, a proper cemetery lamented the beloved dead of the town. There was nothing beloved about Connor and his fellows. The management had utilized a parcel of land now populated with a handful of wooden markers so far from the rest of the graves that he couldn't even be sure the ground was consecrated. That makeshift cemetery would be the furthest Connor would travel again. He closed his eyes to rest them from the sting of tiredness and eased the back of his head against the cold, hard wall. He could no longer adequately gauge how much time had passed since the lockdown had commenced. The screams of women and the crying of children once again burst into his mind. An image of an Indian woman, infant nestled under one arm, the other straightened out toward him, a palm open. The desperate pleading in those hazel eyes, her silent begging as he aimed down the sights of his Springfield carbine. The sudden burst of rifle fire awoke him from his slumber and provided blessed relief from his regular nightmares. The invisible man was gone in the corner of the room, but there was no relief, only the sullying knowledge that he would return. He and others like him were the reason Connor languished in that room. Was losing my mind punishment for taking part in the sins of the past? If so, it has been terrible, albeit justified one. It has left me here, part of the wretched refuse, gone and forgotten. To find meaningful conversation, Connor found himself repeating one-sided conversations. The man next door was incapable of speech. The man in the bedroom across the corridor only held an interest in pointing at various mundane objects with endless childlike enthusiasm. Wretched refuse, indeed. He picked at the sole of his right shoe as it lay in front of him, his thumb pressed at the tightened leather. His only footwear. He had worn them for just over a year, and the leather was just as unyielding, just as excruciating as the last time he'd donned them. Has it been a year? Has it been longer? The passing of the season is the only method of counting time in a place where time stands still. 4 seasons have passed with these boots. My first pair lasted 2 seasons until they were so worn they fell from my feet like loose cloth. They have already been well worn, given their condition and ungodly smell. Even then, I went barefoot for a week before receiving an issue of new boots. At least these were not once the property of a dead man. Small blessings. Still. 6 months. It will be summer 1895, I think. Or perhaps it's still spring. No, the weather has turned for the better and it is now more clement. And so, it is summer, 1895, I think. With a sudden jolt of unprepared energy, his body jerked involuntarily and his hand raised to wipe his forehead before he gained control and quickly wiped the end of his nose with the back of his hand. He shuffled toward the head of his bed until his chin rested on the windowsill. His listless gaze returned to the view of the window. Two men dressed in matching white dull pants with dull white and sky blue striped shirts stood in the grounds below, talking amongst themselves. He recognized them, however, had chosen not to make their acquaintance. Both were known for causing trouble, and he knew the easiest life meant being invisible as possible. A third man, a dandy in a dark blue frock coat with long tails reaching to behind the knees, approached them. He wore high-waisted white pants and large black boots with prominent silver buckles. The red and white shirt under his waistcoat bore ruffles at the neck, and subtle ruffles protruded from the slender sleeves of his coat. A thick red ribbon tied into a bow held his raven black hair in place in a loose tail down his back. This man stood between the two patients as they conversed, looking in turn at both. The two men continued to speak amongst themselves, ignoring the dandy. "Hey!" The voice of a fourth man screeched through the air. A burly orderly approached. "You two mudsills should be working the cornfield. Get to work or it'll be the crib or a dunking for you." When Connor arrived in Fairhaven Falls, the main accent was strange on the ear, with elongated vowel sounds and silenced R's. Connor found this amusing until it was made clear to him how peculiar his southwestern Irish accent would sound to the locals. After years in Fairhaven Falls, however, Connor had become deaf to the main accent and it had become indistinguishable from the Queen's English, or his own indeed. Both men hurried away in silence. The orderly breezed past the man with the red hair bow and passed out of Connor's sight. The man watched the orderly walk away before turning and staring directly at Connor's third-floor window. He raised a bony finger and pointed at him. Connor quickly ducked his head below the window. Back in the room, the invisible had returned, and his eyes continued to bore into the back of Connor's head. Connor screwed his eyes shut and held both arms around his head as he curled into an upright ball. He rocked back and forth. The invisible man had been his companion since appearing in the apothecary in which Connor had commenced employment. "Please, leave me alone," he squeaked. A set of keys jangled in the door of his room, and with a heavy clunk shaking Connor from his concentration, the heavy black iron door opened in silence. An orderly named Boyan walked into the center of the room. A native Bulgarian, Boyan was a beast of a man, tall and twice as broad, not an ounce of blubber on him. He was all muscle and hair. This ensured that he would not receive any intolerance from anyone foolish enough to let slip their bigotry. Boyan maintained a strong Bulgarian accent, though his English was flawless. His confidence in the language was such that he employed the use of traditional American and New England turns of phrase. "Kelly, you were working the kitchen this morning." Connor nodded briefly, acknowledging Boyan's announcement. "Why was I locked in?" he inquired of the orderly, who continued to jangle the keys. "I hadn't misbehaved." "Well, bully for you," he replied in his usual flat, emotionless tone, hiding the sarcasm in his words. "Stinson went off again all possessed-like. He was swiping at everyone. Us lot, you lot, everyone. If you didn't know this place is liquor-free, I would swear that he had a brick in his hat. All patients in this corridor got locked in. It took 5 of us to subdue the bastard. Anyway, he's in a tranquilizer chair and the doors are unlocked now." "Thank you." Connor smiled with gratitude, a false smile that he had perfected in its outward sincerity. Boyan grunted with a nod before turning and walking past the invisible man and back into the hallway. Stinson's days were numbered. As soon as you caused trouble, you were in for a world of pain. It was the way of things. Despite his best attempts at ignoring him, Connor succumbed to the burrowing stares from the invisible man and reluctantly looked in the direction of his uninvited guest. A man of well over 6 feet towered over him, an Indian fellow, dressed in native garb comprising of a fringed buckskin jacket and armbands held in place by naturally muscular arms. In front of his shirt was a necklace decorated with beads in 4 large, thick claws. The front of his shirt was stained bright red with fresh blood. He wore beaded buckskin leggings and clothed his feet in moccasins. In his hand was a tomahawk. The blade was bright red, smeared with blood. However, the back of the axe head was shaped like a pipe. Connor had never seen the Indian's face before. He couldn't raise his eyes to meet the Indian's, even if he wanted to. The Indian walked towards Connor's pathetic frame and stood on the warped floorboard, which remained silent. He raised his tomahawk. Connor leapt from the bed, slithered past the approaching Indian, and burst into the hallway. "Never give him attention, you damn clod!" Wearing the same uniform of grim-ridden white shirts with blue horizontal stripes and dull white pants, they wandered as broken men. Some sanity half-maintained but hope lost strode past him. Others, with sanity lost, drifted as though trapped in a dream. Connor would often wonder if they arrived in such a state, or if this brutal place had molded them into their current lamentable condition. The orderlies swaggered their way to abreast down the corridor, shoving more lost patients toward the walls. The orderly on the left kicked the wheelchair of a helpless soul who stared at the wall. The wheelchair juddered toward the wall, and the patient jerked violently against the blow on the wheelchair. The same patient an orderly would have deposited in the corridor moments before. Connor passed Thomas. One such figure, and sudden stench of stale urine stung Connor's nostrils. He doubled his pace to escape the cloud of bodily waste. Each of these men was Connor's abandoned brother and fellow prisoner. Each was a man condemned to die in a place which claimed to care for them. Neither he nor they would leave. Once committed as a ward of the state of Maine, no one left Fairhaven Falls Lunatic Asylum alive.